Hello and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm your host, Father Nathan, and today I'm absolutely thrilled to have Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove with us. I guess you got a PhD in 1980 at Berkeley
Yes,
in parapsychology. We would
correct.
have just missed each other. I got to Berkeley in August of 1980 and started my theological work at Graduate Theological on the north side of the Cal campus. So
So we might have rubbed shoulders somewhere
could
along.
be, yeah, we might have at least crossed paths there. You're the author of Roots of Consciousness, Psi Development Systems, and the PK Man. Um, you're host and producer of New Thinking Aloud. I want to hear a lot about that. I've been a guest on your podcast too. And you are the recipient of the grand prize of the 2021 Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies essay competition on the best evidence for human postmortem survival. And you're a member of their board of directors, I understand, too.
That's right. Yeah.
Terrific. Well, thank you for agreeing to be here today. I'm honored that you'd spend some time with my audience.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Father Nathan. And as I told you earlier, you're a very popular guest with my audience.
Yes, and I think you said you're replaying that or you're putting it out in a magazine form or
We
something.
have a quarterly magazine, and the next issue, issue number 2, is going to be released on June 1st, and it will feature our interview with you.
Well, we'll make sure that listeners and viewers of this podcast know how to access that in the show notes and all that. But I remember that interview with your assistant was just really fun. I'm on a lot of podcasts, and that one just had a loveliness and an excitement about it that I still remember fondly.
Yeah.
So you got started on this in this world of consciousness studies, afterlife, survival of consciousness, and so on. But of all the things in the world that you could be doing, why did you end up doing this?
Well, if you had known me in 1972, you would have seen a graduate student in criminology
Oh,
at
all right.
Berkeley. And I was doing field work at San Quentin Prison, sitting in on group therapy sessions with murderers and rapists. And it was at that time that I had a dream which totally turned my life around. It was on March 1972, almost exactly 51 years ago, when my great uncle Harry appeared in the dream. And it was such a powerful dream that when I awoke, I was sobbing tears of joy.
Um,
And and I was singing a very sacred song from the Jewish religious liturgy, because that's my background, I guess, and Uncle Harry's background. He was a very devout man. I wrote home and said, "How's Uncle Harry? I had a dream about him." And my mother called me immediately when she got my letter, and she said, "How did you know Uncle Harry had just died?" And when I tried to match the time of my dream up with the time of his death, it was almost exact, as close to exact as it could have been, as far as I know. And that propelled me to question what's going on? How did I have this dream, the most powerful dream of my life? What was it all about? And I decided then and there to shift my career goals, and that this experience was so profound for me that it was worth devoting my life to understanding the meaning of it. And I ended up struggling. How do you do that?
yeah.
When you're a graduate student in criminology, uh, or any field at Berkeley, the options weren't too good, or any major university. If you want to study mysticism or intuition or psychic functioning or even creativity, there are very few opportunities. And I anguished over this for months when I had another dream. And I knew I was going to have another dream. And that dream, I had to act it out, actually. I was in the dream visiting some friends in Berkeley. I knocked on the door of their house, no answer. I found a key in my dream, let myself in, And there in the middle of the living room floor was a magazine. And I woke up as I was paging through this magazine with the feeling of, this is it. The answer to my searching is in this magazine. So I didn't know what to do. So I put on my tennis shoes, ran 5 miles across town, came to the apartment, knocked on the door, and as in my dream, nobody answered. I happened to know where they hid a key. So I let myself in and walked into the living room. There in the middle of the living room floor was a magazine. In my dream, the magazine was EYE. In the actuality, the name of this magazine was Focus. It was a magazine of listener-sponsored radio and television in the San Francisco Bay Area, KQED. And as I was paging through that magazine, it dawned on me for the first time in my life that I could pursue my interests by getting involved in the nonprofit segment of the media, which was very unusual for me at the time because I didn't own a radio or TV. And furthermore, I didn't believe in them. I felt that electronic communication was all phony in those days, but I changed my mind. and I went and volunteered at a local nonprofit radio station, KPFA, in Berkeley. Within 3 weeks, I had learned how to produce radio shows, and the program director had given me a regular slot every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. So within just a few weeks of the dream, I found myself sitting across the table with world-class experts in all the fields that interested me the most. And Father, that's what gave me the confidence to go back to the university and take advantage of some very obscure rules they had where I could create my own unique, individual, interdisciplinary doctoral program in parapsychology. So that's how it got started.
I wish you weren't the only person that had a PhD in that, but it sounds like you are, isn't it? Is that true?
Technically, yes. I am to my knowledge, the only person with a piece of parchment that says doctoral diploma in parapsychology. But to be fair, there are hundreds of people doing doctoral level research in the field, and they often get doctoral degrees that say psychology or philosophy or even medicine.
Well, that's why I'm talking to a guy like you, because I've been a Catholic priest all these years, 37, going on 38, and but I've always been interested in the survival of consciousness. The basic Christian message at Easter is he is risen, that death isn't the end, and so on. I mean, a lot of world religions have some way of coming around to that idea, and then philosophical systems and all that. But I'm 67 years old now, and I've done a lot of things in my life where I can say I've done that and I've finished with it, or at least want to move from that on to something else. And I really want to be in the middle of consciousness studies and how people are. My undergraduate was sociology and social sciences, so I know at least the methodology of some of it, and how to take things that are not. I was 7 years at Stanford, and Stanford has moved very far in the direction of computing and digital things and the hard sciences, such that students there used to call anything that wasn't that fuzzy.
You know, at the museum, the Stanford Art Museum in the basement, they have a collection of apports that were contributed by, if I recall correctly, the brother of the founder of the university, who was a spiritualist and engaged in seances, and these apports came from his seances. So
from the Stanford, from Jane Stanford or Leland?
This was
Leland.
Leland Stanford Jr., if I recall correctly, was the son who died.
Yes, right.
And so his father founded the university.
Right.
And he had a brother who went to Australia and made a fortune in the mining industry in Australia. And it's
Mhm.
this brother who was the spiritualist who donated this collection of apports to the museum, and it's still there.
I
It's
don't
the
know that word. What is that word you're using? Affords?
apport. An apport would be
How do you even spell it?
APPORT.
Okay.
It's
And
an object, typically in a seance, but it could occur spontaneously. An object just appears. It like can drop out of the ceiling or all of a sudden show up.
hmm,
And often these occur in seances,
hmm.
typically coins and medallions and things of that sort just appear spontaneously. It's one of the physical phenomena associated with spiritualism.
I wonder if the word comes from not door, a port. You know, it shows up without coming through a door. Or I don't know.
Maybe that's it. Yeah.
I'm interested in etymologies and
Yeah.
words. That fascinates me. Well, it's interesting to me that you, once you had this dream, really seems like it's, or the two dreams steered you, uh, and you were receptive to being steered. It
I
sounds like
was, I had already at that point in my life, even though I was a criminology student, I had a serious interest in mysticism.
Mhm. But you hadn't had any dreams that were that one stood out in a way that no previous dreams had.
Far and away
Yeah.
above any other dream I've ever had, either before or since the
Hmm.
dream of my great uncle Harry.
Have you paid attention to the Joseph figure in the Hebrew scriptures?
Well, I've seen the musical a couple of times.
All right, yeah, I saw that. I think I saw it in San Francisco. Well, I live in the dream world also, and I was interested when I call them contact dreams. The thing that you talked about, where Uncle Harry and your mother ends up saying, "How could you have even known he died?"
Yeah,
That that to me, I use the language of having a dream about my psychobabble and receiving a dream when it's another consciousness bringing me a message.
yeah. I would, the way I would phrase it is that Uncle Harry visited me.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. And sometimes those kind of dreams don't need to be full of portents or anything. Sometimes they're nothing but love. They're they're just, I wanted to say goodbye, or good luck, or something like that.
Well, that dream was totally transcendent. It's hard to even put it into words. It was such a powerful experience. It's as
Well,
if
you said you woke crying from it, so it
I
wasn't
was
just
in tears,
yeah, it
tears of
wasn't just
joy.
intellectual, it was comprehensive.
Yeah.
Um, well, it sounds like it came right at a moment in your life where you were finishing the criminology degree, but you hadn't launched a career in it yet. Is that
Well,
right?
let's see. That's roughly correct. I did get a master's degree in criminology a few months after I had this dream. And I guess, probably took me about a year to make the transition from criminology to parapsychology.
Well, it must have taken you about a year to figure out how to navigate that arcane system. You said there were some odd little rules that you used to your advantage to craft a program.
Well, I was very fortunate to find just a handful of faculty members who were willing to sponsor me in this unique degree program.
Good for you. I have been in campus ministry for, I think it was 25 years. And one of the things I tried to help students do was learn how to navigate complex systems
Yeah.
to your advantage. Um, because if you just wait for a system to respond to your reply, you're usually on hold or whatever. You really have to be proactive about making a system work to your advantage. Sounds like you
Well,
did.
it was very tricky in parapsychology. The
Sure.
closer I got to completing the degree, the more obstacles people at the university put in front of me. I had to jump through all sorts of hoops before I could graduate. And then, after I did graduate, the organized skeptics launched a campaign to pressure the university to revoke the degree.
Oh my heavens. Uh, What did you do your thesis on?
On training psychic abilities. It was sort of a historical and contemporary overview and analysis of the different methods from popular culture, from ancient traditions, and from the experimental literature on how people can cultivate psychic ability.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the key findings that you came up with?
Well, it was all published in a book, incidentally. I don't
Yeah.
know, it was on the list you read. It was called Psi Development Systems. And
Yeah.
I suppose the key finding is that when you learn to relax your mind, you're going to be better at clairvoyant and telepathic reception. And you can do that through meditation. I think prayer is really another form of meditation, or relaxation exercises, things like yoga, or even hypnosis can be all, the term we would use is psi conducive.
Mm. Did you have any of that involved practices before going to sleep at night?
Offhand, nothing comes to mind along those lines, although I don't see why not. I know when I had that very powerful dream of the magazine, I knew before I went to bed that night that I was going to have such a dream.
Yes. What did you make of that? How did you ask yourself, how did I know that I knew that?
No, I didn't ask myself. I just felt like after months of anguish, tonight is the night the answer will come in a dream. It was a feeling of certainty.
All right.
And I don't know where that feeling came from, but it was definitely there, which is why I went to the trouble of acting out the dream afterwards.
Across the Jewish and Christian tradition, you know, the prophet Isaiah has a list of gifts of the Holy Spirit, and one of them is called understanding.
Mm.
For Christians, it gets picked up by St. Paul and elaborated upon. But that's what, when I teach that, understanding is understanding that you understand, but you don't know why you understand. You just know a thing, and you don't only know it at a surface level of being introduced to the idea, but you know it in depth.
Yeah.
You understand it, and even the word to stand under involves depth.
Mm-hmm.
So you had a gift of understanding that I was about to get the answer to what I needed. That's really cool.
I would say so. And I probably would call it intuition,
Yeah.
which is another way of looking, I think, at the same thing.
I lived in on the Oakland Berkeley line near the Rockridge BART station on
Mhm.
College Avenue in Rockridge. And I'm a Dominican, and we have a big headquarters there that's this big brick pile at 5 acres of like mother house monastery. And I lived there for 5 years while I was doing my theological work. I learned how to do Compline. Have you ever heard of that word?
No.
It's I don't know if it goes outside the Christian tradition or not, but it's at least in the Christian monastic tradition. It's the last prayer of the night, and it's from the word complete. So it's how contemplatives complete the day without just like turning it off, transitioning from the consciousness of the day to the unconscious or subconsciousness of the night, and how to transition from one to the other. And it involves a story of two elderly Jewish people that hung out in the temple night and day, Simeon and Anna. They're both in their 80s. And they hang out in the temple, and Simeon's been told that before he dies, he's to see the Messiah. And so he just hangs out in the temple, figuring out that's probably the best place to be to see. Maybe he'll show up here. And then that story, Jesus is brought in as this little ragamuffin baby, and Simeon goes nuts because he has a gift of understanding. Now at last, Master, now you can let your servant go in peace. And it has that idea that I can die happy, and it that conflation of sleeping and dying that exists in a lot of literature and poetry, the death of sleep, that we die to the day or the consciousness of the day and its troubles and all of its nonsense. And we try to move from that, how in Buddhism it's called the 10,000 things.
Mhm.
all that nonsense that's in your head when you try to be still. You, it's Compline is transitioning from that, and it's like you imagine your consciousness to be maybe an orb, like a ball of light that you can hand to the divine and say, would you hold on to this for me, because I'm not going to be needing it. and maybe you can do something different with it while I'm asleep. And so I learned that. My mom taught me that early as a little baby, but I learned it as a young, I'm not a monk. We're called friars. We're a blend of active and contemplative. So we're supposed to have the heart of a monk with the availability to go out of the monastery. And well, one of our mottos is to contemplate and give to others the fruit of your contemplation.
Well, what a wonderful tradition.
I love it. Yeah, I've been a part of it for 44 years now. Well, let's talk about something else. What else would you like to talk about? Do you have a particular current interest where all of your past experiences have led you? Is there some like growing bud or something that you're particularly excited about right now?
Well, you know what? Can I use you as a person to bounce some ideas off of and get your feedback?
I'd be happy to be that. Right.
Okay, because there is a conundrum I'm trying to work through.
Okay.
And it involves many years ago. Well, you mentioned I wrote a book called The PK Man.
Yes.
An individual named Ted Owens who had very unusual abilities of a precognitive and a psychokinetic nature. He died in 1987.
Is that the PK, psychokinetic?
Psychokinesis, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
PK is the abbreviation.
Right.
For psychokinesis. And he was a rough and ready person, and many negative things associated with his demonstrations. He considered himself at war with the United States government, but there were many uncanny things that seemed to happen about him. And then only 4 months ago or so, I heard from a viewer of New Thinking Aloud who told me he was in meditation. And while he was meditating, this figure appeared to him. And he recognized it as Ted Owens because he is familiar with some of my descriptions on the video. And he thought, well, this must be my own fantasy. So he sat with it for months. And finally, after several months, he reached out to me and he said, I think this was real. I think Ted Owens was telling me to contact you and to tell you that you can reach out to him in meditation and you can communicate with him. So that's basically the conundrum. Number one, is that even a good idea, considering there were a lot of negative things associated with this individual? But then the second conundrum is any of this even real? I thought maybe I had communicated with him in meditation, but I'm really not sure, because in my mind, he was going to perform one of his demonstrations. And as best I can tell, that demonstration, incidentally, was to create warm weather in Ukraine during the previous winter, the winter that just ended, because of the fact that their power was being disrupted. And I felt very sorry for the Ukrainian people. So I thought, this is the kind of thing he used to do when alive, affect the weather. And the weather was warmer, I believe, in Ukraine. I'm still running the analysis, but I don't think it was statistically significantly warmer. So I have all of these doubts in my mind as to whether I ought to pursue this any further, or whether there's anything to it at all.
Well, I'm honored that you would bounce it off of me. He touched me as soon as you mentioned his name. That's, for me, contact is with persons who have passed, usually is tactile first before anything else. But it's not the same as just any old goosebump. That's touch. Immediately, his name is Ted, which is short for Theodore, which means gift of God. My name, Nathan, in Hebrew, Nathaniel, is gift of God. That came to mind right away. When we form our heart and our consciousness and we say, I would like to make myself known to Ted or to Uncle Harry, I think they hear us right away, as long as they're alert, because you can also be unconscious in the spirit state. In fact, most of our funerals have, whether they're Christian or Jewish or anything else, involve the idea of resting in peace. That one of the ways that we hope that people spend at least the first part of their afterlife, or some of it, is to sleep. So they're not always going to be alert. And I think they get the message right away as soon as they waken. You know, like when we sometimes visit someone in a hospital, but we came at the wrong time. They were asleep and we didn't want to wake them, but we might leave a business card or, you know, flowers, or ask the nurse to let the person know that we were there. I think it works like that, that they know at the first possible opportunity that that Jeffrey Mishlove was in touch, wanted to be known.
And he died, as I mentioned, in 1987, over 35 years ago, 36 years ago. Do you have any sense of what it would be like for a soul in the afterlife after 35 years?
I do, because of, in the couple of books that I've written, I started having these dreams about 27 years ago of people coming to me that were traumatized by their death, lots of violent, sudden deaths. When I first started doing that, I kind of had an idea in my head that there must be a template, that that there must be a way that everybody does this. And, you know, I think academia does that to us in part. We keep trying to find commonalities and formulas of things, but then you look at the world around us and it has so much biodiversity and craziness about it. We don't do everything the same way. There are certain things that we do that we have to do a certain way. What I've found with time is that some people choose to pay a lot of attention to it, often because they want to stay very engaged in the lives of loved ones they just left. And especially parents whose children were not raised to adulthood when the parent died. They want to be at Thanksgiving, or they want to be at the graduation or the ballet lesson or something. They want it. And so they end up staying more engaged with time and its passage. And others just find that there's so many other things to think about, they don't want to pay that much attention to it. But they can if they want to. They can mostly live without much consciousness of what time it is on the earth or what year it is. But if for whatever reason they get engaged and want to seek out a thing, they can.
Yeah. Now, as a Catholic, you don't really incorporate reincarnation into your framework, do you?
Well, I don't. Although in the Christian story, when Jesus arrives on the scene and he begins behaving in ways that people are surprised by, they see that he's something more than meets the eye, and they start asking, who is this guy? Or where did he come from? And one of the answers that's out there in the crowd, if you remember Jesus Christ Superstar, if you ever saw that, it was, what's the buzz? Tell me what's happening. That song about who are they saying that I am? One of the possible things floating around was, what, he must be Elijah back from the dead,
right?
Or somebody. So that at least shows up that our common tradition had at least that idea. And remember, Israel is on a trade route, and a lot of the trade was coming from the east and going toward Rome, right along that, and along the Mediterranean there's not a lot of obstacles. The coastline is flat. And so there was a real mixing pot of ideas there. But the short answer, that it's too late to give a short answer because you asked me this question a while ago. But no, my tradition doesn't hold for reincarnation, but I'm in the company of so many people who presume that to be true that I listen respectfully and wonder.
I know my Orthodox Jewish relatives do believe in reincarnation, but they're convinced that once you're born Jewish, every other incarnation will also be Jewish.
Oh, all right. Do your Orthodox relatives, can they say that out loud to other Orthodox, or would they be scolded if they said, I believe in reincarnation? Do you know?
I don't know, because I don't interact with them at that level around other Orthodox people, but I'm pretty given to understand that reincarnation is accepted amongst the extreme Orthodox Jews.
Well, then another question is, must everybody do that? And
Yeah.
is it desirable that everybody do that? Because there can be a presumption that, well, the most exalted souls go on from life to life to life and they ascend and get smarter or holier or something. But that I've also heard from some people in that tradition that some souls are attracted in an unhelpful way to come back to Earth because they want more of something that they crave here.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, of course, they're called, well, what is the word? It's on the tip of my tongue. I'm sure you've heard this. The phrase is hungry ghosts, for
Okay,
example.
yeah.
Um,
I listen, and when I'm talking with somebody that has a lot of knowledge or interest in reincarnation, I ask them about it, and it does seem like, at least I've heard, that it's an option for those for whom that would be a really helpful thing, but it isn't.
that's the
But
way I view it.
all right. In the Catholic tradition, we have more the idea of purgatory, and I'm asked all the time, are these people that you interact with in purgatory? Well, I try to remind Catholic people that we're 1.4 billion out of 8 billion, and that we're not the only ones who die. And the people that come to me are not all Roman Catholic, and they use language that's available to them. And the word purgatory hardly ever comes up. But if you understand, it just means to cleanse. So it's a metaphor of leaving behind something that clung to you that you wish didn't. That's why you take a shower. There's stuff that clings to you that you'd be happier if it went down the drain. So there's that notion, but in purgation, there's some sort of idea of ascending from level to level, going vibrationally, moving, and because of your interest and background in broadcasting, on the radio dial, especially if you're in a car, the station begins to go out and you have to turn it, calibrate it just a little bit better to keep the signal. And it seems like in my experience, there's some ascent, it seems like going up, that they talk about it in that language, to greater clarity and more opportunity. So that's where it can kind of parallel. If you think of reincarnation as an opportunity for greater and greater growth in goodness, purgation in the Christian Catholic tradition can follow that.
Well,
in the end, what do I know?
it reminds me actually of a psychedelic experience. If you take ayahuasca or peyote, you're going to purge yourself as part of the experience. And usually that leads to, according to many reports, and I can attest to it, a higher state of consciousness.
Let me ask you about the idea of truth. We haven't talked about that. You do all this consciousness study stuff. Where does truth enter in as a kind of a touchstone?
Well, I think there are different kinds of truth. The most basic level of truth is that which fits the facts. And in a court of law, they try to get at the truth by looking at the evidence. But then there are deeper truths. There are truths that are not related to facts at all. If I were to say to you, you and I are versions of each other, that's a truth that will never be factually established, but seems very real to me.
You mentioned earlier in your life going to San Quentin and being in a room with rapists and murderers. Presumably, they got to San Quentin because somebody discovered the facts of a crime that they committed that resulted in that sentence.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't necessarily have gotten to the truth of what made that attractive. Why of all the things you could have done that day did you do that thing? There are different levels of truth.
And my experience at San Quentin was interesting because the staff who were supervising me in the psychiatric unit had an attitude towards the inmates, which is that they're not quite human.
Yes.
I would hear phrases like they're a different kind of cat.
Yeah.
Something like that. And my gut experience is that no matter what they did, they are very human, just like me.
Yes.
I really saw them as potential versions of myself there, but for fortune. I can come and leave at will because I'm a student volunteer at the prison and they have to stay there, but it could have been the other way around.
Right, right. Well, my background, my training is in Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas in particular. And they teach that human acts always incline toward an end, a purpose, that we don't do a human act until it seems purposeful to us. And that we normally incline to a good, or at least a perceived good. I can have a thought about chocolate cake in the refrigerator. I can't see it right now, but I can imagine it, and that can be enough to get me out of the chair, moving me in the direction of the cake. That when people do something criminal, even horrific, it looked at the time like it was desirable for producing something that I want. Anyway, I haven't worked a lot. I've done a little bit of prison visitation, but nothing focused. But in the afterlife work that I do, people are trying to come to truth, and sometimes you just have to help them think through, well, what was it that motivated you to think the way that you did? Why, when you formed, do you remember forming that thought? And or can I help you try to put together how you formed that thought? Because sometimes I deal with some that are stuck because they've kind of painted themselves into an imaginal corner. The very first one that I dealt with in that realm, he said, "Who the hell does he think he is, taking me just when my life was getting good?" He had an idea. He had been taught that human death is because God takes you. Well, that's pretty limiting, and for him it was comprehensive, and he would allow nothing else in. And then when he came to me, I had to say, well, you wouldn't be here for no reason. You must have a reason that you're here. You came in my dream, you went to the effort. Why did you do that? Well, I don't know if you've read that in my first book, but he had been watching his wife for 40 years after his death and wanted to greet her when she passes, but I came the way I am. Well, then he had a motivation for possibly changing. And it was a strong motivation. And that, because of that strong motivation, then we were able to say, well, okay, let's get to work. Let's play around with some ideas. And eventually he got what he wanted.
Well, this is wonderful work that you're doing. I have to acknowledge I haven't read your books because Emmy is the one who prepared for the interview with you.
Right, yeah.
And did it, but I'm really fascinated by the work that you do. You're in effect doing psychotherapy with the deceased.
It's funny because I didn't get that degree and I thought about it, but then when I looked at the lifestyle of people doing that, I thought, I don't think I want to do that from 9 to 5. I don't think I want to do that day after day. I want to do other things too. And I found a way of life that allows me to do part of that, but other things also.
I feel the same way. I was licensed as a psychotherapist for some 20 years when I lived in California, but when I moved out of the state, I decided not to renew the license in the states to which I moved. So I really am on a different path now.
Well, one of the things that I'm enjoying learning about you is that when you did have these dreams that kind of intervened, they sent your life off in a very different direction than you might have gone otherwise. But before going into the content of consciousness studies and everything that flows from it, you went towards the tech and the communications part. I did the exact opposite. I only have a podcast because I got so interested in trying to get a message out that eventually it came to figuring out how to do a podcast. But you did it the other way around. You learned about media and communications, and then secondarily, it sounds like, started honing your message.
Well, yes and no, because even before I was a graduate student, as an undergraduate, I did a senior honors thesis at the University of Wisconsin on the psychology of religious mysticism. And I went into it with the idea that there must be some form of psychopathology that would explain why people believe themselves to be seeing spirits and having mystical experiences. But as I began researching the question and studying the literature, I came upon the work of Abraham Maslow, a great psychologist, who pointed out that the most creative people in our culture are having mystical experiences, and those experiences are central to who they've become.
Yeah.
So I was really quite primed before I got involved in the media.
Okay, well, that's good to know. It's just so expansive, all of it, isn't it? There's just the topic is so broad and deep that there's no way you're going to get to the end of it anyway.
No, Father Nathan, I imagine that if you and I were to meet each other 10,000 years from now, we could have a similar conversation.
I think you're right. We would have just a different data points to talk about, but we'd still be wondering about a lot of the same things.
Yeah.
What have you not done that you'd like to do?
Well, that's a wonderful question. I feel very complete. I'm 76 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a lot of ambitions, but I can say this, that I'm really thrilled with the way the New Thinking Aloud YouTube channel has evolved. We have a weekly newsletter. We now have the quarterly magazine. We're launching a book series with White Crow Books. You may be familiar with them. They focus largely on survival after death. Mm-hmm. We have a discussion group on Facebook called the New Thinking Aloud Psi Experience Group for people who are having psychic experiences and want to find a community of support.
Yeah.
Themselves. So I feel like the work that I began over 50 years ago is maturing very nicely.
Yes, and you seem pretty vital at 77, did you say?
76.
76, and able to do whatever it is you feel like doing.
Yeah, pretty much.
I have a retreat that I do sometimes called your Afterlife bucket list.
Uh-huh.
What would you like to do after you die? If it's all up to you. That would, and now that I'm as old as I've ever been, I'm always asking myself, what would you like to do that you haven't done yet? But I'm busy doing it. Actually, I'm really enjoying the life that I have right now and doing the things I'm doing.
Well, I suppose if I were in the afterlife, I would enjoy flying.
Yeah. Would you like to be in more than one place at a time? Because you can do that.
I can't even imagine it. I'm not the kind of person like my wife who turns on the TV set and is watching television and writing a book at the same time. I'm pretty much do one thing at a time.
All right. Well, you won't have to do anything you don't want to do. That's my experience anyway. But it's great fun. My one part of I took the podcast name, The Joyful Friar, not because I think I am that, but our founder, Saint Dominic, that was his nickname.
Mm-hmm.
And it's of all the bewildering number of Catholic religious orders there are, even for a lifelong Catholic like me, if you start looking at actually joining one of them, it's just a thicket of, oh my God, how would I even begin to figure this out? And when a lot of them involve pain and suffering, and I just thought, you know what, the life's got a lot of that already. I don't think I need to build an identity around it. But when I learned that he was called the Joyful Friar and he founded this order that was about joy, I thought, that's the one I want to belong to, which is a long way of getting around to what gives you joy. The kind of joy is the brand of this podcast. What do you think about joy and what makes you most joyful?
Well, talking to you is very joyful.
What a sweet soul you are.
What a wonderful privilege it is to be able to have in-depth conversations with fellow human beings who have the same intensity to their quest in life.
That's what we introverts are doing at a party when the extroverts think we're being wallflowers. And maybe we are sometimes. We're just avoiding the awkwardness of having to circle the room. But sometimes people are just so fascinating. If you get one of them to sit down and be in a conversation for a while, why would you want to stop doing that?
Yeah. And it's really wonderful to be able to go into depth. I love the idea of a one-on-one conversation where, you're not limited to the superficialities.
Yeah. Um, do you think of yourself as a joyful man?
Yes, I suppose I think of myself, this may be silly, but I think of myself as the happiest person I know.
All right. Well, I could give you a run for your money because I think the same thing about me. Uh,
Uh-huh.
but what about a bad day
Right.
or a bad period? Or I don't know if you, at this age, you probably grieved the loss of somebody you love or had disappointments professionally or financially or physically, health-wise. How do you cultivate joy on a day that doesn't naturally present it to you?
That is a very good question. And there are times, for example, I was recently diagnosed with a fracture in my spine.
Oh,
And, that threw me through a loop. And I still don't know what the prognosis is. I'm waiting for more medical tests and physical therapy and yada, yada. Uh, but at the end of the day, I'm kind of convinced, and I suppose, as you get older, you get tested because we're all going to face uh, some sort of crisis eventually. Um, I'm under the impression that the joy of life that I've managed, maybe it's because of luck, but maybe because of karma. I don't know. Uh, that I managed to connect with, that it's sufficient to get me through anything.
all right. Good for you. So that um, you're indomitable.
Well, I don't want to, point to myself and say that's a good way to get in trouble.
All right. Yeah, I guess so. The world could smack you down in the next instant, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, do you believe in a deity? Do you believe that you're accountable to someone or something about the totality of the way you've lived your life?
Um, yes and no. I'm a secular person. I have great respect for my own religion of birth and for all other religions, but I don't really participate actively in them. If you try to pin me down philosophically, I would say that I am a conscious being by virtue of participating in a larger consciousness that we all share.
And that is that larger consciousness personal then?
It has a personal aspect and it has an impersonal aspect to it.
Okay.
And I think ultimately I'm accountable to what I would call my higher self, by which I guess I mean the part of me that is in touch with the divine.
Okay. Right. I, I'm my undergraduate was gerontology, so I was
Uh-huh.
around a lot of elderly people, and with that, some of them are in healthcare settings and so on. And I used to visit people in nursing homes, just cold, walking up and down the hall and knocking on the door and introducing myself. And I saw very early on that somebody could be in the same little cubicle of a room in a kind of depressing healthcare setting and light up the room, and want to know all about you and just be delightful to visit with. And then the next person over might not be as ill or have less pain, but just be unpleasant.
Yeah.
And it was a lesson to me that, it's up to you um, to cultivate joy. And,
Mm-hmm.
and part of that, it means going out of yourself to other people, because if you just stay locked up in your own little world of your own thoughts, there it's a closed system.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Well, I didn't tell you, there's a follow-up story to my dream of Uncle Harry.
well, it's
I
time for that then.
I asked if after the dream, and I'd learned, that he had died at the time of my dream, I asked if I could have a possession of his to remember him by. And I was sent a book, a little book. They said this was Uncle Harry's favorite book.
Oh.
It was written in Hebrew script, so it was hard for me to translate it, but I did. And it was in a language called Yiddish, which is a Jewish amalgam of Hebrew and German.
Mhm.
And it was called The Tales of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was a rabbi in the 18th century who was the founder of the Hasidic movement of Jewish mystics. So I learned then that my Uncle Harry was a mystic.
Sweet. Yeah.
And but the thing about the Baal Shem Tov is that at this time in the 18th century, well, throughout the history, Jewish people have been persecuted, and they didn't have a homeland, and they were subject to pogroms, which meant they would be massacred.
Yeah.
And this was just a part of life for these people. And the Hasidic Jews, following the Baal Shem Tov, learned that no matter how bad things got, there was always reason to feel joy, to sing, to dance, to praise God, no matter what else was happening. And I think that's the key to how the Jewish people have survived under those extreme conditions for well over nearly 2,000 years.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I must be part Jewish. Christian people call our worst day good, Good Friday. And I just believe it's an attitude of heart that you look at the thing that might be objectively difficult, like a cracked spine, and go, well, what good's going to come out of this? Who knows what nice people I'm going to meet that know how to take care of broken spines or whatever.
Yeah.
I have a little corner of my prayer life that's about, I try to stay in the present moment, but I also was taught as a child to pray for a rainy day, to kind of think of banking a prayer and saying, I want to be able to make this withdrawal the day that I need it. And I pray for the day that I'm in really bad health, that I'll at least be the happiest person on the ward, or if you have to come and roll me over and change me or whatever, that it might be a blessing, that there might be, us being together for whatever reason might be a good.
Yeah, no matter how bad things get, it seems as if you always have an opportunity to do some good for somebody in the world.
Absolutely, brother. We're on that page together. Well, I do hope that we end up, you travel to conferences and stuff. Maybe we'll end up being in the same place at the same time.
I wonder. I'm going to be at the International Association for Near-Death Studies. They're having their annual meeting in the Washington, D.C. area at the end of August. I'll be there.
And I will too. And I got a full hour breakout session.
Wonderful.
So that's where we'll meet.
Great. I look forward to it.
All right. Can put me on your dance card. Make sure that we have some time together, but I'll be there. And by the way, any of my audience today, that is open to the public. It's not a members only event. Non-members can take part in if they want. You meet just all the cool kids will be there.
It's a wonderful organization.
It is, and it's and one of the things I love about IONS, we all talk about such strange things, and almost all of us have some part of our life where somebody doesn't want to hear anything about it or thinks that we're nuts, and we all have that in common and can have a good laugh about it, and then talk freely about whatever it is we feel like we have to say.
The thing that I discovered about this organization is that probably more than half of the people have had a near-death experience,
yes.
Which means that for the bulk of them, they've had this overwhelming sensation of love in the universe, and they bring that back with them. And to be around so many people who have been so deeply touched by this profound, inhuman sense of love, way beyond, I have one woman who explained to me, she said, I'm a mother. I know what it's like to love, but this was far beyond any kind of human love that a mother would have for their child.
Well, one of the things I admire and love about the IONS membership is that even though near death is in the title of it, I have not had an NDE, but I'm welcome there. And they'll, you know how at the beginning, if you give a talk there, they'll say, how many have had an NDE? Raise your hand. And about maybe 50% of the room raises their hand. And then the next thing they say is, how many have had a STE, a spiritually transformative experience? That's where I can raise my hand because I haven't had an NDE, but I'm included.
Or have I?
Yeah, but your dream was spiritually transformative. Both of them were.
Incredibly so.
Yeah, and so we belong in the same room. And
Yeah.
I like any kind of human interaction where we can identify ourselves as a certain kind and then say, but you're also my kind. Why, you're welcome here too.
Well, I think at the end of the day, the near-death experience is a mystical experience. It's
Yes.
in some way it's being touched by the divine, and that's certainly how I felt when I was visited by Uncle Harry.
Sure. Well, I'll end this, I suppose, where we began with words and word origins. I have enough mystical stuff going on in my life. I don't think of myself, I don't call myself Father Nathan the mystic, but I belong in the mystical flow of things. I belong there, my experiences do. So I looked up that word, and it just means, mystic means someone who has begun, someone who's been initiated, who's been set on the path or something.
On the path, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's enough. You can call yourself a mystic without feeling like you need to prove something to anybody else. You're just somebody who's gotten started somehow.
I kind of think everybody is a mystic. They may not realize it, but just being here is participating in the greatest mystery of all.
Sure, sure. Well, and I do a lot of retreat work and even preaching at a congregation, on a weekend. I just said Mass earlier today. You have people that are listening and that they're trying to reach. My first book is on the Wizard of Oz, and this has this mystic character in it that's, a flim-flam man, but he's going to reach into the infinite and help Dorothy Gale get back home because she's running away, and he rifles her, gets her to close her eyes to be more in tune with the infinite. Then he rifles her purse and sees a photo and says, "Oh, there's a woman with a polka dot dress. Someone's broken her heart." But he gets her to go inside, even though she's not very disposed to doing that, and turns her around. And she decides on her own, I got to get back there right away. But a tornado takes her, intervenes and takes her in another direction. However, we're at the end of our time. So what fun.
It's been a real pleasure.
Well, let's do it again. And if there's anything else I can do for your organization, I have been a guest on the podcast, but and maybe after we meet at IONS, if there's something else that I might able to do for you or people that you're serving, you can let me know.
I'd be very happy to stay connected with you.
All right. But for right now, friends and neighbors, thank you for being a part of this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. If you'd like to be in touch with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, we'll have the show notes that will direct you to all of his media and things that he is offering the world so that you can take full advantage. But for now, God bless you and have a great day. Bye now. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can make a donation by clicking the donate button. See you next time. God bless.